such a focused person. It's very hard for me to like be listening to a podcast and like learning the information.
Okay.
If I'm working on something for work, or if I'm reading an article too, or it's like I have to pick a lane on some level. So I listen to a lot of music
Okay.
for during my work day or general interneting or something. But a podcast, I have to like decide to listen to it.
You're engaged in the podcast and doing multiple other things is almost detrimental to whatever that other thing is.
At some point, it's like music is one of the only other things. Because I even know people who work on art watching TV and stuff. Like Jesse Nyander, but he'll tell me that while he's animating stuff, he has, cartoons going on or watching movies from the 90s. And so he's doing this. And it's like, if I try and multitask to that degree, then it doesn't take me very long to realize, like, oh, I'm just doing all these things poorly.
Yeah.
And I know other people that's like actually how it works. I have a lot of arts friends who watch TV while they're drawing or something like that. But music is the only thing that I can pair up to other tasks and find actually like helps to push them for me.
Can it be music with lyrics, or does it need to be like ambient music or classical, or can you be creative while you're also hearing
lyric? I mean, yeah,
lyrics?
It's funny because me establishing that rule, it would make it sound like it has to be like thoughtful instrumental but I like it can be things I'm singing along to or this or that. It's like music. I don't know. I feel like I have a very special relationship with music because it's the thing that I like understand the language of the least.
Okay.
And so that keeps it almost separate and magical.
Okay. But it can also awaken like the creativity bug in you.
I have a huge, deeply personal connection with music, and at various points have wanted to become a musician or something. And in the same way that like, scales or you talk to people who like know music and they're like, oh, they just switch time signatures, or oh, this is in the key of, and it's like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Like, I didn't even hear that.
Yeah. And so yeah, I am engaged and get a lot from music, but almost being entirely naive to it, just because like my brain isn't wired that way.
Me neither. But you dabble a little bit, right?
I mess around.
Okay.
I mess around. I'd say it's like, it's funny because in all of the other things I've done, time with acting and theater and that stuff has, on some level, like, sometimes has taken on a quality of like spoiling movies for me, because you see it and you can't help but like think of the way somebody made this thing. I feel that way about writing, or I feel that way about even visual art to a degree, where it's like you look at it and you can't help but like think about the science of it or how it was actually made.
Right.
And music is more like it just magically appears, And so there's something about that, like that purity. And so whenever I mess around with music or fiddle with music with friends, it's like I have no idea what is happening. And that naivete and that innocence is really good, but it also means that all these other things I felt like a bit of legitimacy at, I've never even been close to, with music.
Well, let's get into that, because
Sure.
I feel like you define the label of being a multimedia artist.
Thank you.
You operate in so many different lanes. You mentioned acting, your work with in theater and in film. You're also a stand-up and a podcaster and a visual artist, a painter. I have some of your paintings in this very room.
Well, and I mean, I think it's important to like Yeah, I mean, I feel weird. It's like I dabble in all of those things, and I think, and then I also am very, like I think I'm cautious of people who introduce themselves as like, oh, I'm a writer, or oh, I'm an actor, or oh, I'm a comedian. And if I walked around introducing myself, if I met somebody who was like, I'm a writer, actor, comedian, I'd be like very put off by that person, you know? Because on some level, it's like, I think especially with like writer and artist, because I think those are such romanticized sort of like lifestyle type things.
Yeah.
You know, people have like a very glamorous perception of those things. And so there's a way that you might like curry favor by introducing yourself. I also think that like, because I also think you can meet a lot of people who would call themselves writers or artists and be like, okay, well, like, let me see a thing you've made, you know, or be like, what's something you've made in the last 6 months that counts, you know?
Yes.
And so I think those are like, so yeah, I mean, I just don't want to, because particularly with like stand-up comedy, right? I feel like I've dabbled in stand-up comedy for the last, on and off, for a decade.
Okay.
And so that's a lot of time, and I think there are ways that, like, if I hopped up compared to somebody who started 6 months ago, I think you would see the way those times and lessons. But then I also know and have met and run into people who, you know, at least before COVID times, were like spending 30 to 40 weekends a year out on the road performing comedy.
Yeah.
And so those people are stand-up comedians in a way.
Real road dogs.
That I could never attempt to be. And, you know, and at this point in my life, and I'm even glad my life forked off in a different way.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that's a very fair point. And I appreciate that I got to call you all of those things. Sure. Because that's how I think of you. Because I love how you don't tie yourself down to I'm just this or I'm just that. But I also appreciate that you say, like, if you define yourself by all of these different mediums, it is pretty off-putting. If you're like, yeah, I'm a hostess / choreographer.
Right.
And like,
yeah, well, and yeah, I think you can sound too readily like a busybody if you all of a sudden, it's like, well, think of me as this thing. I will say, and then I think that, yeah, and I think to truly pass muster to be defined as those things, I think there's a lot of sacrifice and dedication to craft. You know, I think all those things like demand a huge buy-in. I am frequently haunted by, not frequently, but, you know, when you decide to serve yourself up an existential crisis or something, right? When it's like, I'll wonder, and I'll be like, how far would I be at any of these things if I had just picked the one thing and like stuck it out
and mastered it,
mastered this one thing. And then I also feel really earnestly like the amount of pressure or the emotional ups and downs that I have experienced with like all of the crafts, and especially once you dump like factor money into it and these kinds of things. And so I don't know if any of them would have survived the pressure all on their own of being like, this is my one.
All encompassing.
Yeah, and so I admire those people that have like the dedication and picked that one thing. And then I'm also like, how did they not just like lose their mind and totally hate that thing?
Yes.
Because you learn it, you know, inside and out.
I have that issue where I'll fall out of love with something because it's so close to me, and I'm like, we need space. You know what? Like, I've been too invested in my painting or whatever it might be, or in my writing. It's like, I mean, that's the plague of the artist, is not appreciating anything that you do or hating everything you do. And then I think that can really drive you to improvement and finding that next level of your creativity. But if you don't get to that next level, you might quit the thing before you get there.
Well, and I have, I mean, one of the hugest benefits of the sort of like natural rotation with them that I've wound up in is like leaving something and putting something on the shelf for a while and getting that creative relationship out on something else, and I'll come back to carving or come back to stand up or whatever it is that I put on the shelf for a while, and like magic, I'll know something new about it, you know. And it took like reaching that frustration plateau and then going and applying the energy to other things, you know. And so it's like this really it's developed, I feel like, this really like organic rotation,
it's like a balance, like
and I feel like they all like they all emerged, you know, super naturally over, not supernaturally.
I know, it's
which
I like
no,
that.
I mean, you know, ultra naturally.
I gotcha.
They all emerged in this way where it was kind of like the path of least resistance was just to go try out this thing for a while. You know, I would have never gotten into printmaking and doing the carving and printing and the visual art thing if I hadn't been super burnt out on performing. You know, I stopped that, like, I started that a couple weeks after I finished undergrad in college, and I'd gotten a bachelor's degree in theater, and by the end of it, I, like, hated 85% of plays, you know, because you're reading these plays and appearing in them, and you're seeing plays, and it's like I learned all the things that were wrong, and I had this big sense of pressure, and there was such a, like, there's so much of your personal self that you sacrifice to do a play because you got to meet up with all these people and everybody's decision matters and the director's decisions matter more than yours. And you know, so there's this huge sacrifice to this communal effort, and they're super intense and super draining. And so directly after finishing, like, getting a college degree and kind of being like, now what? I had the time and energy where I was like, it'd be really interesting to start pursuing, you know, something that I have total autonomy over my time and energy and make decisions. I don't have to go anywhere or be with anybody. And so that was how the visual arts thing popped up. And, you know, and I'd say too that the first several years of it were like, would get a real boost, or I'd have a real push to do it as soon as I was sick of doing things with other people, you know, as all of the cons of working on collaborative things, performance stuff would stack up, and the, like, exhaustion and fatigue of the way that, like, performance is putting yourself out there and dealing with rejection, blah, blah, blah. So all those things would stack up enough that it was like, oh, I need to be able to sit at home and get some creative catharsis that way. And yeah, so they've naturally, and then, you know, and then I'll sit at home all winter, I'll carve a bunch of things, and it's like, I need to see some people, or it'd be fun to share this or see people respond, you know?
Almost the creativity comes in seasons where it's like, okay, I'm sick of winter, like, let's move on to spring. And it's like, okay, I'm sick of doing this one thing that I've been doing, and I've gotten all that creativity out, and now I feel like I'm spinning my wheels a little bit, or maybe I'm repeating myself in my creativity. I need a refresher. I need to go into something different. Let's talk about those carvings, because I'm even curious. I've got a vague understanding of what the technique is, but the pieces that I have in this room, I'm not even sure how you created them.
Sure.
Where did you first learn about these carvings?
Yeah, so I found out about them towards the end of undergrad school, and my brother and I'd both grown up really enjoying comic books. Had always liked comics. We're trading back and forth comics, and both like the X-Men and the Avengers, and then as we both got a little older, like weirder comics, like sci-fi comics, Judge Dredd, or artsy comics, or like underground comics from the 60s and 70s.
Cool.
And so kind of always have appreciated that visual storytelling format. And then found out specifically about this guy named Lynd Ward, and he was a American printmaker and illustrator who in the 1930s published 6 novels entirely in woodcut. And so they are these and I think the shortest one is like 45 woodcuts long, and the longest one is like 80 woodcuts long. But he tells these narrative stories with no words. And so Dover was doing like a reprinting of his novels in woodcut.
Okay.
And some of the news stories about it and everything kind of described it as like a predecessor to the graphic novel.
Okay.
And then so finding those and being really interested in those, and then finding out that there were a number of guys in Europe, specifically in like Germany and Austria at the time, who were also doing wordless novels entirely in woodcut.
Wow.
And and you see the quality of these things, and these guys have both really like complex and detailed and ornate. And all of this old stuff, though, is also purely in black and white.
Okay.
And so it has this very, like, stark, kind of intense image. And I was really taken and struck by that. And I'll say, too, that as a credit to... I worked at the university library for the entire time I was in college. And then in the theater department, it also gave me this sense or this appreciation for like art history. And specifically I got into what was happening in Western Europe and America in like the 20s and 30s, and so Dadaism and Surrealism, and kind of this explosion of isms that are like the birth of all of the weird arts now is kind of this. And it was all these people who were just outraged after World War I, because you took these people who I grew up as in some little village in France, and I got called up and sent to this war, and I spent the last couple years trying to kill this guy who grew up in a little village in Germany. And it turns out we're actually a lot like each other. We were just born this far away, and our governments have sent us to kill each other. And so there was all of this resistance and rage against states and churches and kind of the whole value set. And so you get people like specifically rebelling against all those, and it makes all this new interesting art. And so that was kind of set off this thing in my head where I became very aware that like whatever is happening in art across human history is happening as a response to whatever these people's lives are like, or whatever the problems are.
Sure, yeah.
And so yeah, that caused me to really be interested in printmaking. And then you find that like there are printmakers in Mexico, publishing things for like Mexican independence against Spain, and lots of very political stuff there. There's this huge printmaking tradition in Japan that is kind of right at the end of like the samurai era, and right at also at the very beginning of like Western cultures making it into Japan. And so all of these things they're like related with social movements and change, and then they're also like highly reproducible. And so it's like an important part of it is that it's like cheap to make it, slap a piece of paper on. And so how I do it is I actually carve into rubber because it was like cheaper and less threatening when I started. And I kept thinking like, oh, at some point when I'm serious about this, I'll switch to lino cut or wood.
Okay.
And just haven't, and I'm like 8 years in, so I don't know if it's just fine to do it in rubber, or maybe I'm not serious about it yet. Who knows?
It seems to be working well.
And so, yeah, I mean, just really happy with how they come out. And so, and it was one of those things where immediately from the first one I did, I was like, oh, I like the way this looks. It had, do you know Hellboy? Do you know the Hellboy comic?
I do, yeah. I can picture
So Mike Mignola is the guy who created Hellboy, and he's done art for, Batman's at various points in time too.
Okay.
But his work is always like so heavy and dark, and there's something like serious about it. And he works mostly with like Sharpies, so he's not doing woodcut. But instantly, like the first one I carved and printed it reminded me of that, because it's like, it's either black or white, and so there's something like so serious about that off the bat, and so it was something that I like immediately connected with on that level as well. And it was one of the first things. I was always like a doodler, and I would messed with painting a little bit at various points in time, but it was the first time I like sat down with like an art medium. And I did it, and I just was like immediately impressed with how it looked at the end.
That's fantastic. So was there something about the connection to seeing almost something familiar with like, oh, I recognize this. I recognize this as good. I recognize this as good in the sense that it speaks to me. Like good art, bad art, like it's like you're not looking at it in the right way. Like,
yeah, I think there is something that was like, there was this instantaneous severity to it. I don't even know if that's the right word, but like the heaviness of the ink and the thickness of the lines, and I really immediately liked like the little bit of the splatter, or where the noise is inconsistent. And so I've been looking through all these different things that are, again, some of there's Western European prints from like the 1500s, a lot of the Japanese printmaking, a lot of the huge stuff is like the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. And so it was also, it was like that I had made something that kind of passed for ancient, on some level. And you're like, wow, fuck, look at this. And then I really like, I think this is super frustrating to some people who do printmaking or something, but you never really know how it's going to look, because you're carving into this plate. And you're kind of imagining it, but it's like you carve, and so what you're carving is actually going to be the white space, and then it's also mirrored, so it's going to be like backwards and reverse from what you're doing to it
with how you press it.
And
so you're working in negative.
So you're working in negative, and you're also working in reverse. So like everything I do that has text, it's like I wrote that in pen like backwards, and then carve the letters backwards, and then
I didn't
and
even
so
think
you
of
like
that. Wow.
So you reveal it to yourself. And I will say, and again, I've been doing it for like over 8 years, 8.5 maybe years now, and I still am frequently, if not always, a little surprised by like which I think is almost, it's kind of more similar to the people I know who do photography, as like an art form or something, right? Because you can set it up. You have all the things you know about how to take a good picture. You're looking at it before, you're looking at it through your viewfinder, and you still don't know until you get it developed. You know, particularly for people who are like shooting on film or something. It's like you don't know what it's actually going to look like. You just have all this like practice and technique and experience of what is theoretically a good photograph. And so kind of with the relief prints, it's similar because you carve in and you're like, yeah. And it took me the first couple of years, there was so much grappling with like, oh, so I'm putting this line down, but this line's going to be white. It was such a head fuck for the first while.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And, but now it's like, you know, I sit down and I do it. I'm like, oh yeah. And more or less, this is going to be a big white space. And then there's this thing here, but I'm still always surprised. And I like that a lot because for drawing or doodling or working with pastels or paint, all the different little things I do. And it's like you put it down and you see it right there. And you're like, well, that doesn't look like how it looked in my head, you know? And then you're slapping more on. And then you're like, nah, I put way too much on. And so there's such a way that making any kind of visual art is a little bit of like a wrestling match with your own expectation of it. And so the printmaking, that the reveal really isn't until the end. It routes me right out of that hardship. You know?
That reveal is such a cool thing, I think. Like that you're observing it. Is kind of the final punctuation of like, oh, this is done. Like I did this. Maybe it's a little different than I had pictured in my head, but I love the differences. I love the little flaws or the imperfections.
And sometimes you don't. Or sometimes,
that imperfection.
Well, sometimes it is so different from what I thought it was going to be, and I just set it aside, and I'm like, you know, I got to give it time to dry and settle or whatever. I might feel different about it tomorrow. But it's like, well, what the fuck did I make? Yeah. I think, too, and this will sound, again, you know, if I was introducing myself as a writer or an artist, you know, this would be some real pretentious shit. But it's like it's like you're less, like I'm less the owner of it, right? I'm just part of the process. I was there cutting the things out. I'm the guy who had to go drive to get the rubber, the paper, the ink. I'm like pressing. So, you know, it was a crucial part of the process. But it happened, and here it is. And as opposed to being like the owner or master of the whole thing, I was just making
tool, or not like you're a fucking tool. Like
I can be.
I'm an instrument. I can be sometimes. No, it's like I am an instrument of this creation. I loved. I hope I don't get it wrong, but William S. Burroughs, his definition of art was the creation of something that did not exist until you, the artist, observed it.
Yeah. No, actually, it's funny because William S. Burroughs is a huge, important artistic influence for me, both in what he did with language, and then so William S. Burroughs and the painter Francis Bacon are two people who I think made art, and you know, we're making art like primarily the 40s through the 80s. And they both died in the 90s. But those two guys kind of predicted what the art of human beings interacting with technology to create art would be like. And because William S. Burroughs' cut-up method, in which he would like type out all these things, he'd chop off the margins, he'd chop the page into fours, he'd rearrange it, and he'd write down whatever phrases were interesting and new that appeared. And that is sort of, and then he would then work to arrange them. And so he was more like a collector and curator of these things. And I think that predicts, when people are like, we fed 100 hours of The Office into this AI bot and asked it to write an episode. I think it's like William S. Burroughs was doing that with paper and scissors and a typewriter in the 1960s. And then similarly, Francis Bacon, who was primarily an oil painter, but I consider him to be like probably my favorite visual artist and somebody who I think is hugely influential to how I try and do the engravings too.
Okay.
And he felt as though there was no reason to be a representative painter now that the photograph existed. He was like, he was Velasquez and Caravaggio. All of these guys existed and did what they did and became famous for doing it because cameras didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
And so he like started painting, really in the 1940s. And it was like, cameras exist. They're pretty good at capturing and reflecting. But he was a competent enough artist that he could have just painted, realistic, excellent portraits of people. And he thought there was like absolutely no reason for art like that to exist anymore. And so he always talks about how you have to assign random chance and accident to the canvas and then wrestle it back into your own control. And so he would do things like just throw handfuls of paint at the painting at various points during the process of doing it.
Okay.
So that he was like intentionally making choices to remove his own sense of control, and then he would come back and very intentionally weave whatever random accident he had just inflicted on the canvas. He would weave it back into the piece.
I see.
And I think that when you look at what people like coming out of MFA painting programs, making abstract figurative work, I think he in large part in what he set out to do and established from 1940 something to like 1992 or 3 when he died, I think they are all still, like it or not, operating within the rubric and rule set that he did. And then I think, too, whenever you get, like, we took this AI thing and it blended these images of, flowers and bugs or something to create new images, I think they are very much kind of also doing, again, what he had figured out to do with canvas and brush and paint. And so I think that those guys were pretty far ahead. And I think that they didn't necessarily know that this is what they were anticipating, but I think they inadvertently like anticipated the conversation and collaboration between humans and machines on art that we're seeing now.
Oh yeah, on an analog scale, they were demonstrating this.
And I try and
70 years ago.
I try and inflict that kind of Francis Bacon decision-making into my prints, because if I like start to bog down, I don't know what choices to make, then I'll just like put in a cut. I will intentionally like put in a cut and remove something that is like cross purposes or counter purpose to if I was like really trying to like hammer down the image,
a recognizable structure or something. All of a sudden you've given yourself an obstacle.
I gouge a big piece out of it to be like, well, now I have to deal with this. And so wrestling it back into, and it's like, and again, I feel like I'm doing an easier choice because the way I do it, the ink's going to land there or the ink's not going to land there. I'm dealing with like a total binary. Of the space has color in it or it doesn't.
Right.
Whereas Bacon was doing oil paintings, and so there's all these layers, and it can just, You know, it seems like an endless rabbit hole. But
I'm
I
not
still
sure.
am approaching that same like philosophy. You know.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I'm familiar with Francis Bacon. I wonder if I would recognize his work, and I definitely.
You might, yeah.
Yeah.
You should. I mean, he made 3 figures at the base of a crucifixion. Is his and it's this triptych, and it's this orange background. I just love like the caliber of orange that he used, and they're these weird, like, grotesque, kind of alien, fleshy creatures. And so he was always, and he would do like portraits of people, but their faces would be like warped or twisting off.
Okay.
And so he was always doing this thing where it's like, it's recognizable, but it's not recognizable. And I think he was arguing further that thing that that both the surrealists and the impressionists had started toying with, which is ultimately, it's like, well, how much work does the human brain do to complete looking at the picture? You know?
To make sense of it?
To make sense of it, yeah. Like, what can we take for granted? Because, like, Impressionism, like, oh, I'm painting all this shit, but it's all fuzzy. You know, I'm using the right colors, I'm arranging, and it's all these people at the park or something, but I'm not even attempting to be detailed. I'm just putting, like, a fleshy blob. And then they realize, and they take for granted, they're like, oh, well, the people coming to look at this know that these are people. Their brain is helping to be like, well, these are supposed to be people. And so their brain is totally, without their awareness, is doing more, is providing more detail. And I think that the Impressionists realized that and was like, oh, you know, what a powerful tool in art, and what a powerful thing to notice about the human brain. I think the Dadists and the Surrealists started like fucking with it. You know,
we can play with this.
Yeah, like the brain is gonna work to make it a whole picture. So like, let's give these people a fucking ride.
We could do a series of shapes and colors, and people will automatically try and make sense or try and create a story around this, or why is this? I think we need to find a safe place to compartmentalize things in our brain. And when people look at a surrealist painting or an abstract painting and it's uncomfortable for them, I think there is a piece of that where it's like, I don't know where to put this.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why I'm being challenged by this. And somebody who is maybe unskilled at, or uninitiated, or just unpracticed at being in that situation, in those shoes of, boy, I don't really know what I'm looking at here, and I don't feel great about it, but I'm going to sit with this. But for a lot of people, it's like, I don't like this painting. No.
Well,
challenges me.
And you know, and that's like, that's the way though that we as adults all lose play. Because kids are way more unfettered about, you know, kids see a mud puddle or a cloud or something, and they attach and signify meaning to it, and then they build stories around it. And I think that, I mean, and the purpose of most art is both for people creating art and then also consuming art, I think, is we're all trying to like re-achieve some of that state of play.
Yes.
You know, because there's so much joy and freedom in it. But man, you know, that's not the most of the rest of life. And so I think it's like people who see this art and are like, man, this is too weird, I'm out. It's like those are the people that I mean, on some level I can't help but feel a little bad for, because it's like, oh man, your accounting degree really did it to you, huh? You know?
Yeah. Boy, you say that, and I absolutely can connect to that. Obviously, my work behind me and behind you are very abstract and very. I mean, you could compare it to. It's sort of like Jackson Pollock is certainly a huge influence. Joan Mitchell is an influence. Even some of Dali's stuff. He did some splatter work. I loved it. I for many years was doing I wanted to be a painter. I wanted to be a better painter, and I was doing landscapes. And it's funny you brought up the opinion of as soon as the photograph was invented. What was that artist's name?
Francis Bacon.
Bacon. Bacon felt like there's now no point in doing any of these.
It's like, you want a picture of this person? Oh, great! You know,
that's how I felt. Like I loved painting trees, and I hated just about every landscape I ever did because I was like, it would be so much better if I just took a nice photograph of this.
Yeah. And
instead, I was like, I want to put color in motion, and I want to paint things that I can't see in nature. But when I am painting like this, it is such a playful experience, and I'm very focused in what I'm doing, but it does make me feel more youthful.
Yeah.
Like the whole act of doing it, I feel a little bit silly, I guess, but in a good way. Like, I mean that only in the playful way.
Well, and you don't feel like totally in control, you know? And I think that's the thing that has always like steered me away from you know, wanting to make photo real work, while I'm always trying to like get better at depth or at, you know, simplicity of line or all these things that are important parts of like art technique that they talk about in school or something. But it's like I've never felt the call to make things like, oh, this is just a photo real portrait of a person. And I don't think until I'd ever encountered, you know, Francis Bacon's statements about it, I don't think I'd ever thought about it in terms of like, oh, unnecessary because the photograph exists.
Yeah.
But it was this part where it was like, oh yeah, well, that's still being in control the whole time. And so I feel like I'm carving, and I'm sure when you're doing this stuff, it's like that you are, again, back to that Burroughs quote, like more of a conduit, you know, you're like, and that's like where, you know, people talk about, you know, the flow state in all kinds of different practices and everything. And I feel like in the carvings, I hit the flow state frequently, and that's great. It's a period of time that is both like cathartic and contemplative and meditative, but like time just passes differently.
It's incredible
when I'm doing it, you know?
You're like, oh my God, 8 hours have gone by.
Yeah.
Or yeah, and it was effortless.
And that's another part where it came to this thing where my first arts, my first creative expressions was theater and comedy, and specifically like improv comedy, and then improv comedy like moves you to sketch comedy, and then sketch comedy kind of like as soon as you're just concerned with like writing, and it's like, well, how do I write funny? And then stand up seems like a prudent skill to adapt towards that. And then as soon as sketch, it's like, well, are we playing it convincingly? And then all of a sudden that drops you off in theater. And so it was all of those things, and I definitely have hit the flow state with all of those things but it was like I needed something that I could flip the switch on totally by myself at home. And that's where the visual arts thing came out. And I think that both you and I mean, both of our work, it's like there's this way where clearly you have to throw caution to the wind. And so I've always kind of been fascinated, and I've met a lot of them, but I've always been fascinated by the artists I know who like have a very fine hand, and everything's very like methodical and thought out and under control. And I respect that. And then it's like, well, for me, that's like all that juice I burn up in theater.
Okay.
You know, and maybe I have less of that juice in the first place because it's pain in the ass to do it for theater some of the times. But
I can only imagine.
But it's that control.
Yes.
Having everything dialed in and screwed down. And yeah, I would hate my art if that was how I did it, you know?
Same here. I feel like I'm quoting Jurassic Park here when I say control, that was the illusion.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It is certainly an approach to how you go into whatever your medium of art is. But I think letting yourself go to the process, and certainly in mine, it's one stroke at a time. And even though it's paint thrown on canvas or whatever the material is, they are strokes, and I actually was early on when I started this method of splatter painting. People, like, I would have friends just be like, "Oh, you did a Jackson Pollock," and I was like, "Well, no, I certainly didn't. I mean, I didn't try and recreate one of his. I wouldn't. Right. I wouldn't dare. But
you're like, I'm trying to do Mike.
I'm trying to do Mike. I'm
Yeah.
trying to do my thing." And I think I came close a couple of times to try like mimicry, but ultimately it was like, I want to find my own voice in this. And when I was I know that Pollock and many other abstract artists get a lot of criticism for not being as legitimate as fine artists in other mediums. What I really loved hearing that, and I actually think it was Pollock himself who said, he said, "I know it looks like a mess on the canvas, but you have to trust me that each one of those strokes, it was intentional and it was a part of me. Anybody can walk up to a piano and play a perfect C minor. What's the next thing you're going to press? Like, what are you going to play from that point to make art?"
Mm-hmm.
So anybody can go up and make a beautiful brushstroke. What do you do next?
Yeah.
And it is the sum of all of those strokes, all of that work, and then the reveal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're dealing with. And like, I've had a piece where I absolutely hate it, and I think I'm going to do one more layer. I'm going to pick one more color and see where it goes, and then I hate the piece, and then all of a sudden it reveals itself.
Well, and some of those are nice because, and it's the reason why again I've always tried to take that cue from Bacon and, you know, make innocuous marks in a piece.
Mm-hmm.
That is that there's this delicate preciousness about a piece. If I really like it the whole time, then it's like, well, which one of these cuts am I going to make that's the wrong cut? And so there's something freeing of if you've just been fucking up the whole time,
mm-hmm.
you know, and you're like, man, I don't even give a shit about this. Let's surprise myself, you know? And so reaching that point of being like, this might be beyond salvaging, can create it allows for some of that freedom or that exploration.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, in so many of my pieces, it's like I start out and I put some kind of pair of eyes, and it goes from there to flesh out the rest of the face. And it's this weird thing where I'm sure you feel the same way with like the splatter stuff, where it's like, well, there's this fascinating thing because it's like, well, at a certain point, how is it that you don't just accidentally make the same piece over again?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, shouldn't I have just, if I start them all the same way and I have this kind of like methodology that I've picked, then wouldn't it make sense to accidentally make the same one twice,
mm-hmm.
you know? And that doesn't happen. And I think, and that speaks to precisely the Pollock quote it's like, people named all the notes on a piano keyboard because it was instructive for those people learning to play.
Mm-hmm.
But it's amazing that, like, I mean, every once in a while somebody, you know, steals the hook from a pop song from 15 years ago.
Uh-huh.
But it's amazing that like people keep writing new songs.
Oh,
You know?
absolutely.
It's like I've thought that before, where it's like and it just expresses my naivete towards music. But it's like, well, isn't there a finite amount of notes? Shouldn't we have shouldn't we have used them all up?
Yeah, haven't we run out yet?
Yeah, I can't believe we're not just looping back over songs. You know,
totally. You're right. I think if we're like to speak on music, like I think I fell out of love with the guitar for a number of years, and I played the guitar when I was younger. Not to any success. I learned the guitar. I learned how to read music, and played in a shitty basement rock group.
Okay.
And I mean, it was complete garbage. But it was, there's Garage Band. This was Garbage Band. And I think it was, I was obsessed. I loved rock music from the 90s. I loved Soundgarden. I loved Collective Soul and Nirvana, and like I know those are they're different all over the place, but I loved it. And then I fell out of love with it, and I was like, I'm just not into that guitar heavy stuff. And I really was listening to primarily hip hop and electronic music and things. And then I'll come back now and then to rock and roll and what people are making now and how they're throwing it back to the 60s. Like there is this cyclical nature with fashion and music, and these sounds come back after 30 or 40 years, and you start hearing them again. And I'm like, this is a very, very new song. Like this is not a remake song, but it's familiar. It sounds like things that you heard in your dad's record collection. And I love that there is such variety in that genre, in that instrument, or that combination of instruments, that you can still be creating within the rock and roll genre. I mean, when rock and roll came out, it was seen as a fad. When hip hop came out, it was seen as a fad. And it wasn't appreciating the art form for what it was and the depth that it could realize.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, I think that because I was just thinking about like the songs I'm hearing now, and there are even things that like, because the specific generation I was in and everything, nu metal was really huge as I was like in
what
high
is nu
school.
Metal?
Like Korn and Slipknot.
Oh, yeah.
And and so that was that was this cultural zenith of like the cultural primacy and significance of like Limp Bizkit, right? And then there was this period of time where it all became like comically bad, and we all disavowed it. We're like, yeah, well, that was a silly time. And now you hear new stuff, both from rap and rock and the people meeting up, and it's it's even the generation under me who were listening to that being like, oh, wow, what is this? Who it's in the DNA now, And so, and some of it comes back and is like cheesy, but some of it is totally legitimate. And I love, and I want to say too, it's like, I think, like we were saying right at the beginning, I think that I am allowed on some level the most sincere relationship with music because of the fact that I have no serious traction or ability to make it. There's that freedom of naivete.
Absolutely. I want to touch on that, but I also want to admit really quickly that during my workout today, I was jamming out to Korn.
Fuck yeah.
At one time, and it was Adidas.
Nice.
Adidas came on.
All day I dream about sex. Wow. Wow.
And I was just like, oh my God, this is great. I'm not like, I'd be embarrassed if it like just came up on a playlist at a party or something.
Right, or you're at a red light.
I'm like, is everyone cool with this?
You're at a red light.
Am I triggering anybody?
Oh, yeah.
But I loved it in the moment.
Yeah.
And I'm not ashamed to admit it.
Not
Maybe
at
a little
all.
bit.
Hey, I mean,
No, Korn was great. I'm a little ashamed when I'm like, if I am jamming out to like Limp Bizkit, I'm like, all right, there's some underlying shame here.
It depends. I mean, anything from Significant Other, I think is totally legitimate and appropriate. Chocolate Starfish, the hot dog flavored water.
$3 bill, y'all.
Oh, $3 bill, y'all. That's I love his the cover of Faith by George Michael.
Oh my God. Not a bad cover.
Not a bad cover. It's not
terrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, and then I was like listening to, all of it. So there's a lot of the bands that will never have a comeback or not on the greatest hits thing. And I've gone back and I listened to some of those. I've been like, yeah, yikes, wow. It was really 15-year-old Nick really just wanted guys screaming over, drop D bass lines or whatever. But there's a lot of great stuff in there still. And it was it was a very valid portion of the experience, and it made me feel a lot. And I think it turned me on to or introduced me to things like funk and hip hop in ways that I probably wouldn't have gotten around to, or at least not that early into my musical listening life. And but yeah, so there's something so funny about that though. It's like it's.
I think there's something good about our guilty pleasures.
Absolutely.
The things that we feel a little bit guilty about loving. Not to say you've got to fully embrace it, or else you don't truly love it. It's like there's something special there. Like you feel a little bit bad about liking this thing, and even that alone should be examined. Like, well, you like it. Like I'm not talking about dark shit. I mean, things that are mainstream.
Like, no, I mean, yeah, because I've grown into appreciating like pop music more in my adult life, and then also right now there's like a huge revival of pop punk that is going on.
Okay,
and in fact, like Travis Barker, who is now a middle-aged dude who's dating one of the Kardashians. So
you are giving me some news gossip.
Just brought you some pop culture cred on Hot Mic.
I love Travis Barker.
But he's like featuring
best
on
cardio
all of these...
in the rock game. Dude.
Yeah.
That dude, it drums like a maniac.
And so he's like grown into the nationally famous version of the cool older dude still hanging out at the back of the punk show. And he is now like featuring on the new pop punk anthems of these like 20-year-old kids who are making them. And it was weird because when I was in high school and I liked metal, I wasn't sure if I was as allowed to like pop punk anymore because I was like, oh, that's not as tough as and then by the time I was in college, pop punk was a little played out and everybody disavowed. Like it was like, oh, I was never really into pop punk. And now, 2021, I'm a 32-year-old man and I can be like, yeah, it's some fun, bright, poppy music. And Travis Barker is still drumming for it. Crazy. I'm glad that guy's awesome. Okay.
That's awesome.
And so yeah, there's that weird way. I think like what you were saying about the guilty pleasure thing, I think that there's like a weird thing where I almost wonder if it does something for like your reptile brain different than the monkey brain, because there's this aspect where we're like concerned about our tastes and wanting to seem erudite and like mature, reasonable adults with excellent taste, which I assure you, I do have excellent taste.
I think we've established that, like intrinsically.
I appreciate it. I think it's likely that I have the best taste of maybe like top 30% taste of people currently living, maybe top 40% of people who have lived through all of time. And so I hope that,
I like
you know,
that.
when they're doing the lottery for who gets to go into space, you know, I hope that taste
I think you're
factors
even
in,
being modest
you know?
with that.
I hope taste factors in.
I think
It might not.
most people have terrible taste.
Yeah, well, I will say that I have had better taste than anyone I've known for my entire life, you know, since the start. But
that's what even you said, like, am I still allowed to like this thing because I'm into this other thing?
right.
Like, that is it's an interesting, I certainly struggle with that all through adolescence. Like, am I a fucking poser? If I like this, but I also, this is interesting and I'm getting into it. But it's like, but I haven't been into it for 10 years or like.
Right, because I'm only 17.
Because I'm a child.
You know? Yeah, it's like, and it's this thing because, I mean, I've thought about that a lot at, you know, at my early 30s, where it's like you can look at, and it's embarrassing some of the times, depending on how you want to look at it. You can see your different phases and eras, from like your teens through your 20s.
Yeah.
Of the people you see yourself to be, and the people and like what you perceive yourself as versus what you would like to be perceived as. And it's funny because you like totally move away from some of those people, from some of those things. You're like, oh, I no longer want to really be that person. And then you also like accidentally, sincerely become some of those things that you aspired to.
Mm-hmm.
And like, for instance, like at this point, when I was in high school, I had a subscription to Revolver magazine. Do you know that one? It was the heavy metal magazine.
I'm familiar of it. I did not read it.
So it's like,
I remember seeing it in the I don't know, Sam Goodies or
and they would have like
FYE.
the big feature on like, you know, this is the new Tool album, so we caught up with Maynard James Keenan.
Yes.
And so it'd be like all of the, you know, both to the giant ones we've all heard of, to all the little ones parroting them, and you know, and some bands that are still around, and some bands that we're all embarrassed and wouldn't even admit we've heard of, you know, Spine Shank, Moto Grader, you know, some of these, but so I had a subscription to that magazine as a little suburban moody high schooler in Longmont, Colorado. And I saw all those like dirty, hairy, tattooed guys.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, this is the epitome of cool. Like, I'm going to become one of these guys, you know? And as it turns out, I have found a lot of things I really respect about like cleanliness and keeping hair to like within reason. But I still got all those tattoos, some of which are dumb and some of which are really cool, which hold up. But it's like, so you do that thing where it's like, did you ever play that game of like, how would my 20-year-old self feel about myself now? You know, both like to look at like the shit you have, the shit you've done, and the person that you are, you know? And I think there's all these ways that like 20-year-old Nick would be like impressed and intimidated by 32-year-old Nick. And then he'd also be like, oh, he's kind of a square, you know? Like he hardly wanted to break the law at all. You know, I'd be like, yeah, 20-year-old Nick. There's salient reasons. There's salient reasons for that, you know? Like, you know, if I like refused to buy my 20-year-old self booze or something, I guess is what I'm imagining.
Okay.
Being like, hey, let me, you know, you don't need
You
it.
don't need this.
I'd be like, what a square.
Yeah.
32-year-old Nick wouldn't even buy me booze, you know?
Oh my God. Just that bit, or like that little sketch idea of a younger version of yourself playing Hey Mister. with
Yeah.
the older version of
You're like,
you.
Oh man.
And you're like, no, kid.
Also, you should quit smoking. Don't tell me what to do. It'll be
Yeah.
like, look, in a few years, you're gonna wonder why on earth.
Smoking's cool. I'm Tyler Durden.
Yeah. I'd be like, look, man, you're really gonna wonder how you got this far into the smoking thing a little later. You know.
Is this new ink on the inside of the I mean,
No,
it might be
that
new.
one is, I don't know. That one's like a couple years old. I can show
Okay.
you a new one that I started
Yeah, but
in 2021, which is kind of, I was like, oh, global pandemic. But
Yeah.
then I was like counterpoint. I was like, well, put up with a lot of shit over the last year, like we all have. And then I also specifically told myself, I was like, and I never even do anything irresponsible anymore.
You're like,
I was like, I got to keep a little bit of my edge.
Yeah, these wild oats need to be sowed. Oh, wow. Wow, buddy.
Yeah.
Is this your piece? Did you
No, this
ink
was
it, or like
this was a piece. So this guy who is this tattoo artist named Ishmael Johnson, and
Okay.
he's in Fort Collins here.
shout out
And
Ishmael?
I've seen his at Scrimshaw Tattoo up on North College, and I seen his work over the last like 13 years, like almost the entire time I've lived in Fort Collins here. He's been an artist who's been doing stuff, and so I remember like a guy I worked with at the Morgan Library 13 years ago was like, hey, check out this cool tattoo. And I remember that it was by Ishmael, because Ishmael's kind of a more distinct name than like Tom. Yeah. And so
That's hilarious.
So
It's one of those biblical names.
yeah.
It's just biblical enough that it
Just
stands
biblical
out.
enough,
Maybe if
you
it's
know?
Ishmael
Yeah.
or Jebediah.
Yeah, I was thinking Jebediah was my next Bible name I was gonna pull out, Oh yeah, Methuselah did it.
I love it.
But so yeah, I've been seeing his work around town for years. Always liked it, but I've never gotten anything. He does a lot of like pretty big pieces, and and I've always been both for budgetary, and then it sort of evolved into aesthetic reasons. So I have a lot of smaller,
Manageable
little
pieces.
tattoos.
Yeah.
And but I've been thinking for a long time, like, oh yeah, I'd really like to get a piece from Ish. And then he put up this and two other pieces that he called Frogmobiles. And it just hit like a good checklist of aesthetic buttons for me.
Okay.
There's like the weird way in which, again, like byproduct of like early 90s where Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
I see that.
There was also the Street Sharks. I don't know if
I
you
remember
ever
Street
recall the
Sharks.
Street Sharks. Do you remember the BC Bikers?
What were the BC Bikers?
It was a biker gang of dinosaurs.
Oh no!
And so they were all.
I
like,
remember.
anthropomorphic.
Do you
but they
remember
had, like
Biker Mice from Mars?
No.
Okay, maybe.
Biker mice from. We had different anthropomorphic
Slightly,
biker gangs.
Our age is off by only like 2 or 3 years, but I've found with people in pop culture references, there are some that cross over undeniably, but then there are some that with a year or two separation, it's like that was on and off the air so
we
quickly.
were on to the next thing, my friend.
So BC Bikers?
BC Bikers,
Okay.
There's biker gang full of dinosaurs, but so there's other, and then
I
kind
get it now.
Yeah, you feel dumb now, huh?
Before Christ Bikers.
Yeah, it could be a totally different. It's all these bikers one by one getting like converted by like a big van of pulls up and be like, what happened to Rodney?
I love that.
They got him.
He found Christ. Well, that's not us. We're the BC Bikers.
They tear off his patch. Have a good time with your new friend Jesus.
That's the new. We could sell this to.
Oh yeah.
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 It's the new streaming show.
But and then kind of like, and then, so that was like that covered the like nostalgia end of it, and then like Hieronymus Bosch, the Flemish painter from like the 1600s, and then like Mobius. I don't know if you've seen his comics.
I know both Bosch and Mobius. Yes.
And so they were like, so yeah, it just hit all these buttons of being like a little bit of like strange, surreal body horror, as well as like reminded me of a couple fond childhood franchises. And so he put up 3 Frogmobiles, and I was like, oh, I gotta have one of those, you know. Gotta get a Frogmobile.
It's cool, man.
Thanks, man.
It's wild, weird, and wonderful. Just like you, my friend.
I appreciate that.
I'm not going to double down on saying all of the mediums in which you create. I'll just say, Nick Holland, you inspire me. You inspire me to create,
that, man.
And I appreciate you. I love that you came on the podcast. And
yeah, thank you so much for having me on. Also, I mean, we didn't even get to a couple of the mediums, so I feel like we got to do
this again.
Got to do it. Got to do a sequel.
Let's do it again. Let's do it again soon. Let's do it often.
Awesome, man.
Thank
I'd
you,
love
buddy.
that.
Appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
This was a lot of fun.
Cool.